Hey guys, welcome out to Revolution this morning. We're going to look at the last 6 verses of Revelation. Now, this has been hotly contested between myself, Jan Kranz, Timothy Berg. Who else has been involved with this? James Snap to a tiny degree. Um, and over the years, I've thrown up things that I've found contradictory to the official narrative. And so, what I thought that I would do, I thought that I would start studying this issue. Now, I've been on and off studying this for several years. And so, what I would usually do is jump to a certain particular issue in this and read over things and try to just get a general understanding. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is a strength of mine is to be able to define words, to be able to look at small details, and it might look like spaghetti, but I'm able to put them into categories and sort them out. But probably one of the weaknesses of mine is to look at an overall picture. And so I guess in a way I've been caught up in a lot of weeds, and I'm trying to sort out this issue and sort out that issue, and haven't seen the forest through the trees, in a sense. And one of the things is when I did my book on Revelation 16:5, I had been putting information into my website. So this is my website here, the Textus Receptus site. Now I'd been putting constantly just putting information in. Like I would just look up. I'd be studying something like the Arabic Bible, and so what I would do is I would just look up pictures of the Arabic Bible in Revelation 16:5. I would go to Walton's Polyglot, and then I would get inspired to go somewhere else, and and that's the sort of the details that I was looking at, and so it wasn't until yeah, so you can see there's a lot of detail on my site, but sometimes I can have a lot of detail, but I'm not really going anywhere with it. It's just like, okay, well, that's what this guy said here. Is that good or is that bad? Is that favourable to the Textus Receptus position, King James position, or is it, does it look like it's against it? What do we do with this information? But I just kept putting it in there and constantly putting it in there. What happened was when it came time for James White to, I said, James White says in his book that it doesn't appear in the Ethiopic, but it certainly does. And that was in one of Jack Mormon's books. He's passed away just recently. And Jack Mormon, he mentioned that, and that was, there's another guy on Facebook who mentioned that he had shown Jack Mormon that information through Hoskia. And so I started studying that Ethiopic stuff, and so that was just like another detail I was adding to a pile of details. Now, I wouldn't say at the time that I had an overall picture. I just had a whole bunch of details. I had some leanings and I had some thoughts, but seriously, I probably knew, if what I know is 90% of what you can know about Revelation 16:5, it's probably not. It's probably like 80%. Back then, I probably knew like 10 to 15% because there was a whole picture that I was missing. And what it took was James White to jump on his dividing line and say, Nick Sayers has said that it's in the Ethiopic, blah, blah, blah. I challenge him to read Jan Kranz's book and blah, blah, blah. And just sort of, he went on this whole thing about a challenge. And so at the time I was in Pakistan, I had some time on my hands. And so I thought, well, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to go through everything. All the information that I've compiled, I'm just going to go through this and get the big picture. And so going through those minute little details, it really helped because I would be looking at a big picture and things would just start locking in. And it was a bit of an epiphany, I guess, to really understand the name of Jehovah. And now I know a lot of people still don't understand what I'm talking about when I talk about Revelation 16:5 and the name of Jehovah being there, and yeah, the whole thing about nomina sacra and how it relates to the name of Jehovah and how that's treated in the Old Testament and why holy was put there. But I think anyone who is open, like some people, they have a barrow to push. They're pushing the critical text, and this has been one of their favourite trump cards for years. Especially someone like James White, pull this up in a debate in the middle of it just to throw a spanner in the works, sort of thing. And I think I've really rattled that tree, and I think I've gotten a good grasp of why the word holy is there. And I think that I've discovered something that's actually not even my idea. It's actually Theodore Beza's concept. And so that's one of the things. It's not like it took a while to put these two things together, but I was realizing, hang on, I'm actually just agreeing with Beza here. And it was so good because I've got this guy. I'm like, I've discovered this. Beza said this, and this is matching up, and it was so good. And so out of that came a book, Revelation 16:5, and obviously if you're a regular on my channel, I do harp on a little bit about that because I've written a book about it. But hopefully I can do just as much work on these last 6 verses of Revelation. And so what's happened recently? Now, I've been just compiling information, and I created a little page. Now, I may as well show you what I've been doing. I've had my Revelation, where are we? This might give you a bit of an understanding how to navigate my site as well. So if you go to Revelation 22, thankfully, a lot of it's coded to Strong's numbers and things like that. Now, if you go to 19, now I've been working on this page, Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. Got Theodore Beza's Greek there, the King James Version, the 2016 edition that I've worked on. And so you can compare those and look at all those. An interlinear text. Now, sometimes I've written this interlinear text, maybe 5 years ago. So I can change my views on that, but I haven't gone around to changing it because there's so much information in something like this. And I'm always open to going, hang on, that's wrong. We need to change the information. One of the things I find in scholarship is we've been fighting this battle this way. Let's not change it. Let's not look outside of the box. Let's not re-examine everything again. It's a good story. Let's not let these pesky facts get in the way of this good story. And so sometimes I can be satisfied with a conclusion, but then other facts come along, and I'm like, well, I have to really change my conclusion. Now, it might go favorably, or it might ruin my argument. I have to scrap that and go some other way. And so, but I'm open to that. And I think that's one of the things is on this issue, when I was chatting to Jan Kranz, Timothy Berg, one of the conclusions that I'd come to was there are 2 issues when it comes to Revelation chapter 22, the last 6 verses. Erasmus clearly said that it was homoioteiton, which is when you have similar endings, or homoarcton, which is when you have similar beginnings, or these are part of parablepsis. So parablepsis is when you have parallel things. If you have a sentence starting with and, usually wouldn't start with and, but say it's starting with the, and the sentence below it starts with that, you might skip a whole line. And so that's what Erasmus clearly said happened in Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. So that's what when he was questioned about these things, he said, well, that it went in the Greek manuscripts, and he clearly says it in the plural. It's quite interesting. In the plural Greek manuscripts, I saw this issue, this problem. And so, and what's happened is this manuscript, went missing for 300 years. Franz Delitzsch he rediscovered this manuscript, and when they're looking at the last verses of Revelation, there's 6 verses that are not there. And so what they've done is they've said, well, this is, say, what Jan Kranz has come up with. Oh, Erasmus has had a senior moment. He's sort of forgotten that all those verses were missing, or he's actually covered up that those verses are missing. And there's a whole bunch of things that Erasmus has said, and they've been sort of, people don't know where to squeeze them. Now, the critical text guys, they've put it nicely into the pattern of Erasmus just, was an idiot. it's the usual thing. Usually I'm dealing with James White saying this sort of stuff, but he sort of just summarizes, he'll look at Kranz and stuff and just summarize and go, Erasmus was an idiot. He had a low view of Revelation. He didn't think it was, canonical. He felt that it was deuterocanonical. He didn't know who the author of Revelation was, and so they're coming up with all this stuff, and so I've been examining some of these things, some of these claims, and going, hang on, no, that's not quite matching up. Hang on, no, Erica Rummel, when she's doing some of the Latin translation, that's different to when Jan Kranz does his Latin translation. And Erica Rummel says, no, the Greeks doubted who wrote Revelation, but Kranz, he's changed the Latin word olim, and he makes it so Erasmus is doubting who wrote Revelation. It's like, oh, okay, which one is it? And it's like, okay, if he doesn't respect Erica Rummel's translation, can I trust Erica Rummel's? And so then I'm going through and comparing older translations of Erasmus's Latin and other schools that have come in over the years, and I'm like, there's so much difference. And one of the things that I learned before I was even a Christian, I remember watching programs about Nostradamus. And so Nostradamus, obviously, he was, anything to do with future prophecy and anything like that, there's a market for that. Now, I think that market's probably dead with Nostradamus because of the internet, because people can now look at these things and study them and go, oh, that's really stupid, or look at a YouTube video about it. But, 1980s, when I was growing up, before the internet, people were right into this. And they were talking about Nostradamus predicted Hitler, and Nostradamus predicted Napoleon, and he did this and he did that. And it's like these books would come out of just all this stuff. And I remember looking into it, and it was actually just the way that Nostradamus's words were translated from the Latin. And so, so when I become a Christian, I remember early on, we watched a movie about it, and they went through the predictions of Nostradamus. And it was really good. I think it was like it wasn't Dave Hunt, but it was like sort of in that crew, just sort of, exposing Mormons, exposing Nostradamus and all that sort of stuff. And so our church is pretty good at, regularly having these type of videos and teaching things. And I realized that people were just reading into the Latin language, whatever they wanted. You could, if it sounded like Napoleon, even though there might be 100 words that sound like Napoleon, they're phonetically similar. If it sounds similar, well, then it's the same, and you can just translate it over, and there's this sort of spiritual meaning, and it means Napoleon, And that's why, I really despise, when people don't translate the Bible literally, because you can sort of put whatever you want into the text. And so, but anyway, so I've always been aware that, the Latin is a different language. When you come to the Greek, I can go through and go, okay, English and Greek, yes, this matches with that and this and that. And there might be, a few times when, words are the wrong way around, or there's idioms and things like that, and you're like, okay, well, I have to sort of figure this out. But a lot of the time, the Greek and the Latin, they correspond. I mean, that's why interlinear Bibles are quite popular. But when it comes to the Latin, I mean, I've tried to, I've got my best, Latin books out. I'm on the internet going through stuff. I've got Google Translate open, and I'm going through these things, and my Latin just turns out so poorly. And I'm like, this language is quite difficult. And one of the things that's really opened my eyes is in Revelation chapter 16, verse 5. And this information is not in my book either, because this sort of came as a bit of a result of me focusing on this, making a bit of noise about it, and people started looking into it and going, hang on. James White's saying that he restored this from a conjectural emendation and sort of pulled it out of thin air. But then someone like Jeff Riddle, who knows Latin, and he knows how to translate Latin, he was like, no, it actually reads that he had an ancient manuscript. And so this caught the attention of quite a few people, and eventually Jan Kranz and Larry Brigden from the Trinitarian Bible Society, he translated that, and if a whole bunch of people were looking into this, and they were saying, no, he's saying that he had a manuscript. And then a few people like Vince Krivda, he brought forward, and Stephen Avery, I think, they brought forward some old commentaries that were talking about Beza, Revelation 16:5, and he clearly says that Beza had a manuscript. So that's how they interpreted it back then as well. And it was like, wow. So then I'm looking at this translation. So where I got the translation from Latin into English was from Thomas Hollands. Now, I'm not sure if he actually did that translation. But the thing is, James White got it wrong. Thomas Holland got it wrong. I got it wrong. Pretty much everyone got it wrong. And it came down to the translation of the Latin. And this has been an issue for like 200 years. I mean, there's been people saying Revelation 16:5 is an error. It's a conjectural emendation. Beza just pulled out of thin air. They've been saying it for, well, I can go back to Nessel. I think it's in his 1904, when he's talking about the Textus Receptus, he's talking about Revelation 16:5. And he's saying that this is a ridiculous reading. It shouldn't be in the TR and everything. And yeah, you go earlier. You go to Tregelles and Wetstein and these guys, and they're arguing against it. And it's like, I don't think what amazes me is that this has gone so long without being noticed, and it's taken someone like me. I'm not a Greek and Hebrew scholar. I'm not a high flying theologian. I'm just a nobody, just sort of plodding along with this website and just sort of copying and pasting things and examining things and going, hang on, what about this and what about that? And then and see, I didn't even really spot this in the Latin because I can't read Latin. It was actually Jeff Riddle. He started pointing this out, and he's like, well, this is translated wrongly. And so one of the things is, like, when I'm going through this issue, I'll jump back to Revelation 22:19 later. Actually, my link is down the bottom here. And I was halfway in the middle of telling a story about why I made this page, but I'll get back to it. But when I look at it, when I look at, say, like, here's Jan Kranz, he says something like, its author has long since been unknown. So that's what he's saying Erasmus was claiming. Okay, no, he didn't know who wrote Revelation. Well, Erica Rummel's written the authorship was once uncertain. I mean, that's a huge difference. And I'm into Bible translation. I'm into correct, accurate translation of biblical literature. And so when it comes to what Erasmus is saying, I want that to be of the same standard. And I remember D.A. Waite saying that when he was in college, he said it was so hard to translate non-biblical texts because the King James was so accurate to the Greek that you could just go through the Bible and go, okay, that corresponds with that word and that corresponds with that sentence and this and that. But when it came to other literature, it was poorly done. People were just elaborating on things, and they would just throw words in there. Well, in the Bible, you're going through and you see an italic word. You're like, well, that they don't use that in the Greek. Oh, that's interesting. And it sort of teaches you about the Greek language and how it's structured, and it's quite interesting. And it's very precise and very accurate. But what I find, the Latin being translated is not precise. It's not precise enough for me, because I want it. This whole thing has caused James White to jump on his program and say, Erasmus has a low view of Revelation. Now, Jan Kranz said, well, he says it in other places, and it's like, okay, well, I'll examine those claims as well. Or is he actually just reinterpreting that? Because who's right here? Rummel or Kranz? Or are both of them wrong? Because the thing is, Erica Rummel's not a TR person. Jan Kranz is not a TR person. Or both of these people are on the critical text side. And I know some people say, these people are neutral. There's James White's like, these people are neutral. They're just throwing up history. Sure. But so anyway, that whole thing with the Latin, I mean, if we look at some of the way things come across, like I was chatting to Timothy Berg on Facebook the other day, and so here we have Erica Rummel. She says, I had the words of the text copied out. Okay. And so that's what Timothy Berg was saying, because I asked him, I said, where exactly does it say that Erasmus didn't copy this manuscript into, or he was extracting the Greek text out of that manuscript? And where does it say that his assistant did this, not he himself? And so, he showed me some things that was very helpful, actually. I was like, wow, that's really good. And so I sort of stripped that and kept the skeleton of what he was saying, and I put it into my website here for future reference, and just so we can sort of build on those issues. But one of the things is, like, here's Erica Rummel. She's got, from it, I had the words of the text copied out, okay? But if we read down here, this is how it's transcribed on a website called Christian Hospitality. I think it's .org. And I was actually reading on a Latin forum, because, you start searching for these types of terms, and they were talking about his website and the Latin on it, that it was that the Latin translations were correct. And so he says, from that we could ensure the words that belong together were correctly transcribed. So I'll just grab that and I'll put it into a notepad, and we'll just compare these, because this is what I'm saying, that the Latin is so different. And I think the thing is, some of these things are thought for thought. So Rummel has, from it, I had the words of the text copied out. But then this Christian Hospitality website has, and this wasn't in this forum when they were talking about it. They weren't Christians. They were just talking about the Latin. And this guy jumped on there and said, "Is this website correct in their Latin?" And they said a few pointers, and then they said, "No, the website as a whole is correct in the way that they're translating the Latin." And so they have, from what we could ensure, so from it, I had the words, or the words that belong together, or the words of the text, were correctly transcribed, copied out. But see, the thing is, what Timothy Berg was saying is that Erica Rummel says, from it, I had the words of the text copied out. So if I was Erasmus and I was talking about what I did, and I said, oh, from it, I had the words copied out. So it's like I got someone else to do that. Where this other one is saying, from that, we could ensure that the words that belong together were correctly translated. So it has we there. And it doesn't have that whole concept of another person there. Now, I'm not saying Erasmus didn't have help, but see, what this has done, say Jan Kranz, when he's talking about, the banana peel experiences of Erasmus, he's got this one manuscript that he sort of, just got his hands on, luckily, and then he's realised the last page isn't there, and so he's got this scribe to copy it out and then give Erasmus what he's got. So there's mistakes that this guy did, and then Erasmus has got his text, then he's passing on to someone else, and it's a bit like a Chinese whispers sort of thing, and then all these errors just end up in the text. So it's just another layer. So that's why I was interested in who extracted this text. Where did we get this from? And so I'm going to go through all this, but I'm just sort of letting you know where I'm coming from. So, a lot of the time I've just been going through Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. So you can see on my website here, I've got all sorts of different language editions. Some of it's filled in, some of it's not, some of it's copyright, so I don't bother, and they're just modern versions anyway, stuff that I wouldn't really even respect. But so I've got a bunch of information there, some of Beza's stuff. So this just saves me going back and forward, so I can take a screenshot of that, put it there, so I know exactly what Beza said. And so if someone says, no, Beza said this and that, or what I'm doing on my my other page is I'm putting all these into a chart. And so, verse 16, you can see, 15, 14, 15, 16. So it's going from, the Scrivener down through Beza, Stephanus, and the editions of Erasmus, Complutense and Polyglot. And I'll probably throw the Collins in there as well, which I did the other day. So I took a screenshot of the Collins. I thought, well, I may as well put it in. So I've actually put that in from the screenshot. So that's accurate to that. And so so that's some of the things that I've been doing and throwing those things in. So what had happened was this page here was, I just sort of created this little side page because I thought one of the best helps for me has been my website, because sometimes I'll be doing a study and I'll just throw a bunch of information into a page and I'll study something to them, something in a microscopic way. I'm going through definitions, looking at etymology, looking at English words and Greek words and Latin words and German words, and I'm putting this information into the site. But 3 days later, all that stuff's gone from my mind, but it's still there. It's like this has become part of my extended memory. And so I'm just like, okay, I'll put it there and I'll receive that later. And so sometimes I actually forget concepts. I go back and read through my site. I'm like, that's right. I sort of figured this out a while back. And so one of the things that happened recently, I was just going back through. Now, I printed this stuff out of Jan Franz. He was critiquing Hollands on his examination of the issues that we're talking about. And so I had this printed out maybe about 4 years ago. And so I was just going through marking things. And that's when I come up with a lot of the issues of Olim and, these tiny issues that I'm like, hang on, Erica Rummel's different to Kranz, and who's right here, who's wrong here. And so, but that hasn't given me a bigger picture. And so recently I was reading through Kranz and I was listening to some of his stuff on YouTube, where he goes through a quick little video of this. And I guess in a way I sort of became confused with some of the things, because I really, in all honesty, I don't have a position as yet. I'm open, because I see glaring contradictions in the critical text position. So say the same as Revelation 16:5, I'm like, well, I know that there has to be certain answers there. There are scholars who have gone through, like, Calvin, Stephanus, Beza, the King James translators, Elzevers, all the way through up till, Bengal. And these guys were looking at Erasmus's stuff. They were saturated with Erasmus's material, and they're like, okay, we understand what Erasmus has done here. Now, because there's so many anecdotes about Beza and about Erasmus, straight away um, my inner gut feeling goes, check everything. It's like if you've been to the restaurant before and you're eating a bit of food and you got home that night and you've got a bad stomach ache and you've got diarrhea and you're vomiting, and you don't just rush back into that restaurant the next day and like, hey, you're like, actually, I want to check. I just want to. Can I have a look in the kitchen? Can I? Where do you get your food from? Can I look at some of these dates? And this is what I feel. Um, uh, like when I'm talking, say, to someone like Timothy Berg online, I'm not saying I have a full whole picture like I do with Revelation 16:5. I'm starting a journey towards a conclusion, but I'm not just going to swallow the whole thing that Erasmus just lied. And so, what I'll do in this video, I'll explain what critical text people um, think happened. And so I'm going to just read through, and I think it's a really good evaluation of what critical text people think. It was done by Timothy Berg. Now, Timothy Berg is um, now he's a critical text guy. I've gone through some of his material on his website, and I find some of these things very good. Some of these things I find he just accepts what's happening with the critical text side. He trusts scholars and things like that. But I mean, like in this, he would say I've got a presupposition towards King James Textus Receptus. But the thing is, if everything I've studied in depth so far has gotten me to the point, like say Revelation 16:5, if I've studied that and that's caused young Krans to go, oh, actually, no, Beza did say he had a manuscript. It's like, oh, okay, you're admitting that as well. And then he's like, yeah, but Beza tricked himself with his own notes, and he makes up this Bart Ehrman sort of story. It's like, oh, okay, you're just trying to wiggle out of that. And then he's like, oh, yeah, there is an Ethiopic reading out there that's the same as King James, but he actually doesn't go through the other Triadic declarations and see, because he's like, oh, it's only got instead of which the past, the present, future. Oh, it's only got like the past and the future, or the present and the future. I can't remember which one. But if he looks at all the other Triadic declarations, they're the same. If he went through Walton's polyglot and did that, so I've gone and done that homework, and I'm like, well, so his notes that he has on his conjectures in Munster, to me, his notes on Beza's manuscript and his notes on the Ethiopic are wrong, and so I'm looking at that, and it's not every now and well, it's not all the time that I feel like I'm ahead of scholars, in some things, like say with James White, he's obviously not on the same level as some of these other guys, but you study things out, and eventually you get to the point where you're looking back at James White and you go, man, you were just making stuff up. You were just pulling things out of thin air. What you were saying wasn't accurate, and then you point those things out, no one listens. But then it takes someone like in the middle, like James Snap, to go, actually, James White, you're wrong here. You're saying this. You're saying, and then people go, oh, But the thing is, I'm not defending Hills. I think Hills is wrong. I'm not defending Holland. I think Holland was wrong. I think Krans did a pretty good job at showing that he doesn't know the manuscript evidence and things like that. But where I'm going with this, I'm examining absolutely everything. I want to go right to the ground and build up. I want to go right to not just to source documents where it's like a translation from a critical text person. It's like, no, I want to go to their translations of the Latin. I want to look at exactly what they're saying. I want to look at how that was perceived in the generation of Erasmus, in Calvin's generation. How did the King James translators look at Erasmus's work, and what did they think of what he was saying, and did they come to these type of conclusions? These guys are fluent in Latin, world-leading Latin scholars. Because the thing is, I've just seen so many errors out there, and this is from my own research. I'm doing some research, fumbling along. It's like, oh, that fits together, that fits together. Bring a pretty picture, and I'm like, hey guys, look at this, and that's causing someone like Jan Kranz to change his material, but not really side with me, because that would be, that would be detrimental to their story. And then with that's with the manuscript information from Beza. But then also with the Ethiopic, he's sort of going, oh yeah, we admit that, but that's not really, how would Beza know about that? Well, if you look at my book, I didn't do this for Kranz, but I actually did it for James White. I showed him that Janius and Tremellius were clearly heavily involved with the Syriac edition. I mean, Tremellius did the second Syriac Bible, printed the second Syriac Bible. The guys who did the first Syriac Bible also did the Ethiopic. So they would have known about it. It's like as if they didn't know. Well, they would have had all these translations around them. And so, I just feel that, the information is there, but they're just not accepting it. And that's fine. It takes a while for things to filter through. But on this issue, I just want to go from the ground up. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to firstly read something that I wrote to Timothy Berg. And I was sort of explaining what I'm doing, because I felt that, like, I would ask a question and he would say, well, don't you know this and don't you know that? And I was like, well, yeah, there's lots of things I don't know. And I'm not saying that I have this whole elaborate story. But what I'm saying is I can see enough holes already in previous things that I've studied, and enough holes in this issue to go, hang on. You can't, that story about Erasmus just lying or having a Joe Biden moment when he's talking about Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, that whole story is just not gelling with me. It's just not, it doesn't answer. I mean, it might sit with you. You might go, oh, that fits it. To me, it's just like, that just seems ridiculous. Why would Erasmus, his greatest critic, Lee, or of that time, he's saying all this stuff, and he just comes up with this elaborate story. And Kranz is sort of like, he's like, well, he's either lying or he's having a senior moment. And it's like, well, should we go, shouldn't we examine that? Shouldn't we check that out? And I'm of the school where I don't have these scholarly rules to entrap me not to think outside the box, because I think some people they learn a certain discipline and they're taught never to think outside of the box. That's the whole thing with science. Science is going, okay, let's forget everything and let's start again over here with something else and just see what happens. Let's just work on something else over here. Let's not forget everything. Let's just examine this one thing and throw it out there and see what happens. And so I'm going through these things going, hang on, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up. That's contradictory. And I've seen enough of the critical text side, which is been adopted by a lot of Textus Receptus guys as well. I've seen enough of that to go, there's so many holes in this story that this needs a total revamp. Okay. And so that doesn't mean that I know what needs to be built there, the structure that needs to be built. Like with Revelation 16:5, I'm just piecing together things, and then I stand back and go, hang on, there's a picture here. This is happening. And so that's where I'm going with it. And so I was trying to explain this to Timothy Berg, and I said, and also because there are things that I said that are wrong, and I know they're wrong. It's just like, that's just wrong. And so I'm pointing those things out. Other things I'm fleshing out and throwing out there. It's like, what about this? What about that? And so I think the difference is people on the critical text side, they have this story. It's like, that's our story and we're sticking with it. And we're just going to sort of, anything that bolsters our story, we're going to add to it, and we're going to put cushions around it, and we're going to make it look pretty, and that's going to be our story. And we've got 15 layers of our story. And so, hopefully, people who go through first, second, third, fourth, fifth layer, they still don't get to the core of the whole issue, which is basically that Erasmus lied or had a senior moment, or and all this sort of stuff. And so, I'm not saying that critical text people are deliberately doing that. It could just be mistaken. But from my dealings with certain critical text people, I do know that they fudge the figures, just like I believe Kranz has done with Revelation 16:5. He's seen information. Oh, actually, Beza did say he had a manuscript. Okay, well, I'm wrong. Let's just make up a story that he forgot, what he was doing, or, the Ethiopic does say that. Well, no, it's still not a reference. It's still a conjectural emendation that Beza just made up. And, it's like, don't let the facts get in the way of your story. And so this is what I'm expecting here, that there's going to be a whole bunch of new facts come out, and there's going to be a whole bunch of deflections and, and more anecdotes. See, the thing is, the more that you hear someone say, the King James translators didn't know what they were doing. King James translators, they slipped on a banana peel over here. I call them the banana peel anecdotes, where Erasmus, he's rushing to print. You can imagine him around the printery with all this Greek stuff that apparently he doesn't really know that well. And it depends on who you read. Some people, they respect Erasmus. Some people, they just trash him as just a babbling idiot. And he's just like got the Greek letters, and he's pushing, and there's deadlines, and now I've got this one thing of Revelation. Oh, the page has fallen off. Where is it? Where's the page? It's like just get the Three Stooges and throw it in the mix, and it's sort of like you got the critical text story. That's what I see, and that's why I jump in this whole story, and I'm like, let's look at this. Okay, so 1 + 1 equals 2 here. Yeah, that's fine. I can think that. Yeah, 1 plus the Three Stooges plus this plus that equals banana peel moment plus. It's like, gosh, let's get all these anecdotes out of the way, and let's make lists of these anecdotes. There's just dozens of them just in this alone, and I think it's interesting that we know that scholars, and this school of scholars, they know firsthand that people make up stuff about Erasmus, and if it's a good story, they'll stick with it. So say, the Erasmus, I think it's the rash wager or the rushing to print. I can't remember which exact one that Henk de Jong has debunked in like 1982 or something. But it caused Metzger in his third edition to change his mind. But it also, but people just keep repeating this. So it's just like this story that just gets repeated, and it doesn't usually get corrected. And then you'll have someone like, even Timothy Berg's like, hey guys, can we stop with that story? And even James Snapp's like, guys, stop saying that story. But it just keeps getting repeated and repeated. And we know scholars do this. We know it's like, well, that fits our story. And so, anyway, I think you've gotten a good understanding of why I want to study this out, why I want to get to the bottom of it. But I was just writing this to Timothy Berg. I said, okay, it may help if you know what I'm doing. What I do know, don't know, and trying to understand. I'm questioning everything and getting to the original sources and compiling info into my site. Some things on my list include creating an interlinear of relevant Latin quotations to check the Latin translation of Rummel and others. So like I was saying, I just don't trust that this Latin, the Latin translations into English and other languages has been done correctly. I've just got to. I was talking to a guy this morning, and he said, we can work through the Latin, and I might have to, pay for a guy to do the Latin. No, thanks, guys. There's been a guy sending me money every month, and it's really helpful. And that money will go towards, translation projects and things like that. And and I'm okay financially, when I'm working, and so I, usually I pay these things out of my own pocket anyway. And so, but to pay someone to do a fresh Latin translation or to look at that. And so I'm going to be contacting Jeff Riddle, Larry Brigden, and a few other people, and just going through these main parts, where Erasmus is talking to Lee and when he's talking to Stunica and other guys, and how they would translate the Latin. Because sometimes I'm reading an article and the Latin is translated so differently. I'm like, is this a totally different um, section? Is this a different? Did he reply at different times to other people in the same way? And it's like, no, it's exactly the same, but it's just one person's translation over another. And so, anyway, um, when I read over the English, I'm just not confident in it, and I can't read Latin. I may pay a guy to do the Latin for me, as it will save a lot of time. So, if I do an interlinear, that's, it's hard work. But if I get someone to translate for me, someone who I would consider neutral, that would help a lot. I also want to go through the relevant manuscripts and put them line by line in comparison with Erasmus. And so, like, Hosky has done quite a fair bit of work on this. And, the good thing is I can put, pictures of manuscripts on my page. And so this is the Reuchlin's Codex. And so, I've just sort of got a bit of a screenshot there. But yeah, you can go through and you can, actually, sorry, I said Reuchlin's Codex. That's 2049. And so this is one of the manuscripts that they say is after the age of printing. And see, that's the thing too. I've been going through 1 John 5:7, and I see so many anecdotes there about Erasmus and the banana peel moments that he had there, and and who pressured him to do what and why he did what he did and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, can I trust the scholars that this is a back translation? Or this is basically transliterated or it's copied over into manuscript form from Erasmus's printed edition. Can I trust that? Or are there other voices out there? So this is the thing. I just don't have that information at the moment. But they're the type of things that I'm going to be looking at and examining everything, because it's like I just don't trust that these things have been done accurately. I also want to create a timeline that shows where these concepts are coming from. So, Stunica, Lee, and then later to the concepts of Bengal, Tregelles, Tischendorf, people like that. A search in authors also. So at times, Old English translations of these words reveal a lot. So, like, in Beza's Revelation 16:5 note, where in that generation they said Beza had a manuscript, so that was how it read and interpreted, for example. So we know that around 1611, I think it was, there was a guy who was talking about Beza, and he said, well, Beza clearly says he had a manuscript in Revelation 16:5 in his annotation. So it's like, well, that's how he interpreted it back then. How were Erasmus's words interpreted back then by scholars? I'm also looking at depth at 2814, so that's the manuscript of Reuchlin's, which I'll go down. Where is it? That's not the one. Do I even have it there? I don't even have a picture of it. But yeah, the manuscript of Reuchlin. So that's the one where it's got the commentary. I might just show you a picture of it. So, whoops, the text. So this is James Snap's page. So it sort of looks a bit like this. So a lot of it's just Greek commentary, and then you got the Greek biblical text in the middle. I'm not sure if that's the red writing is the Greek biblical text. That might just be a heading. But yeah, so these Erasmus had to extract the biblical text out of that commentary, and so But I want to even question the possibility if this. So I want to go right down to the ground with this. Okay, from I don't believe it's a fake, but I want to question: is it a fake? And so I'm going to go through it, see if anyone has claimed these type of things. Why they would claim that, because obviously this became an issue around the time of um, Tischendorf, and so there would have been opposing voices. A lot of people just accepted what was said, but there were opposing voices, and I want to hear those. I don't know if Burgon wrote about this, or I know Scribner. He wrote a few things, but I think Scribner was pretty much critical text. He he come. People like to put him on the TR side, but for me, when I read his material, it's like I believe he was probably one of the strongest driving forces for the Westcott and Hort text. I mean, I don't think he wanted it to go that far, but he was still on the committee. He was still agreeing with a lot of things. Um, so even questioning the possibility of it being a fake, although I don't think it is. And so I think even with what Stephen Avery's done with Sinaiticus, looking through those issues and Simonides and all the rest of it, I think that's normal scholarship. I think that's, people are like, you think it's a this and that. And it's like, well, I do fluctuate between like, look, I'm not really sure and all the rest of it. Because I've always said, and even when I was with Stephen and we're um, talking with James Snap and Josh Gibbs about this issue of Sinaiticus, I basically said, look, there have been fakes before. Archaic Mark is an excellent example of a manuscript that everyone was saying this is the bee's knees. The Alens, nearly every third page of their books had this manuscript referenced. And then it turns out in 2013 they found Prussian blue ink in it, and it was a fake. And so it's a modern day forgery. Um, and I think that manuscripts of importance need to be tested. And so I would say straight away, Vatican Sinaiticus, they need to be scientifically tested. And we can't just go by handwriting. We can't just go by, the way things look, or if it looks old and things like that. I think that there are there's so much relying on these manuscripts that to me it's like evolution. It's like they find a tooth here or a bone here. If they hadn't have done tests on these things and gone, oh, actually this is a tooth of a pig, it's not a human tooth, forget it. We would still be believing those things. And I think in science we need to evaluate things at the best that we possibly can. And so I've always gone. I think that both sides. Now, some people know so much about this, the issue of Sinaiticus, that they're like, it's a fake. Some people, they are on the other side, they know a lot about it, and they're like, it's genuine. For me, I believe that most people take this by faith because we don't know that. We don't know as much as these people on these sides. And I think it's a thing of faith. It's like, well, is it old? I guess. Is it recent? I'm not sure. It's like, I'm in that category where I'm like, at first I was like, wow, it's been proven as a fake, and then I'm like, well, hang on, there's some good argumentation about the colorization and things like that. But then it's like, against the colorization thing that came out. But then there's a whole bunch of things that just are not closed off for me there, and I'm like, well, how do you answer this? How do you answer that? How do you? And so it's like this type of study has to be done on that as well. And I would love to do that. I think it's important to do that, to just get to the point where we make decisions and not have presuppositions. And I think scientific evaluation, I mean, we can test these manuscripts and you can do tests and find out, exactly, what type of animal it was, which part of the world it came from. You can test these inks and find out, there's certain material in modern inks that's not in old inks, and you can, see certain scratchings of the pens and find out exactly what type of wood this was made of, or metal, or whatever the pen was made of. And yeah, it's quite amazing what they can do with science, with like forensics nowadays. And I think that type of thing needs to be done. And so I'm open to examining these things. And so there's quite a lot of books out there about, well, what I'm discovering, there's quite a lot of books out there about Reuchlin, about Erasmus, And so listening to Jan Kranz on YouTube, I've listened to his thing, quite a few times. Listened to it when it came out, and sort of, but I'm going back over it because there's a little bit that I've skipped here and there. I didn't understand things, but there's a guy claiming that Reuchlin's own handwriting is in this manuscript, where he was saying that it goes back to Hippolytus, I think it was, in the year 200. So that's why Erasmus thought it was important, because this is a commentary that he was saying is a very ancient commentary. And so, and one of the things is, in a commentary, if you were to say find, say Theodore Beza's annotations, that would be gold to find, someone talking about the text, because they're talking about things, and if it's not in the original text that they're talking about, I mean, the commentary itself would have, well, they're talking about this angel, or are they talking about an eagle? It's like, okay, well, what are they talking about? And so that reflects what was there. And so it's quite interesting when Erasmus chose this type of manuscript, because he knew the value of having the commentary back up what was written at times. And so sometimes we see that, like with Revelation 16:5, with Hamo of Halberstadt and Beatus of Libana. They've got the text and they've got the commentary, and sometimes they have pictures too, or marginal notes that have other things written. And so sometimes they'll have, all three things will have the TR reading in it. Sometimes it's the commentary that has a TR reading in it. Sometimes it's the text that has a TR reading in it. But it's quite interesting to go through those things and to go, okay, what's changed here? And how come they've got this reading here and it's been taken out? And why did they take it out? And where did they copy that from? And so, yeah, I want to go from the ground up with Reuchlin's text, and also take into consideration that this might not be the text that Erasmus used. And so I know that there's probably a lot of, well, pretty much all the material is pointing to it is. But I want to flip it on its head and go, well, let's just see if it isn't. Let's just examine it. Because this whole concept of the back translation from the Latin, and this being the only text that Erasmus used, has opened up a whole can of worms to, Erasmus, he just grabbed things from the Latin here and there. But it totally contradicts the whole thing about the Communionian. I mean, why would Erasmus wait for a Greek manuscript? Why would he wait until he's got sufficient evidence in the Greek to put it into his text when he could have just back translated it from the Latin? It contradicts other things that he's doing. So this is what I'm saying. It's like, I understand that there are critical text argumentations there, and they're well fortified, but it's like I'm just seeing holes in it. It's like that just doesn't match up with that, and that's not making sense to me. And so, and I also want to look at manuscripts of a similar nature. Were there 2 of these, 3 of these, 10? Were these a popular manuscript? I know that when we were looking at, I think it was Beatus of Libana, when I was writing my Revelation 16:5 book, there were like 36 copies of it in Spain, in museums and libraries, and so it was quite popular. And so that gives you an interesting insight, like people in Europe would have been looking at these manuscripts, and these manuscripts have these TR readings in them, and it's like, okay, that's quite interesting. And so I want to look at this Andreas commentary with the text in it. Are there others out there that are very similar? Could we be mistaken that maybe Reuchlin had 3 of these, maybe he had 2 of them, maybe he only had 1 of these? And so, but these are things that I want to be asking, and I want to be finding out answers either way, and so just looking at the facts. So looking at manuscripts of a similar nature, perhaps owned by Reuchlin, and other commentaries of Andreas, just in the relevant areas. I don't want to be spending too much time. I did start a bit of a project going through through Reuchlin's manuscript here and going through from Revelation 1 on my Textus Receptus Academy page, and I was like, this is huge. But I also would like to translate the commentary around this. So some of these things, obviously, they're of the first degree, some of this of the second degree, some are of the third degree. Some of them are quite easy to do. I can go through Erasmus's his last 6 verses in his 15, 16, 15, 19, 15, 22, 27, and 35, and I can put them side by side, compare them, go through his annotations, and just see if there's any changes and differences and things like that. And that's quite easy to do. And just putting word next to word. It doesn't take much brain power to do that, and I can do that till we've got all these lined up side by side, and it still doesn't tell us a story. You know what I mean? But this is just so we can look through and see, okay, where did Erasmus change things? Because he said that there are things changed. And this is where we get into the whole thing where Kranz is like, Erasmus thought he changed it. He thought the guys corrected it from the Aldine, but they didn't. Another banana peel moment. To me, that just doesn't sit right. It just doesn't sit with Erasmus's level of scholarship. And for him to, to say to one of his critics, that's what happened, to just make up these stories, it just doesn't seem correct. So yeah, checking all the relevant Greek and also the commentary surrounding it, which may bring some light. Also, exactly what Erasmus had before 1515. So before he started everything, he did a Latin translation. What was involved with that? And also his earlier association with Aldus. So he lived, I think it was 7 or 8 months with Aldus in Venice, and Aldus was he had the Byzantine school there, so he had, I think it was up to 47 Greek scholars there. In this Byzantine school, Erasmus was invited there. They considered him as one of the greatest Greek scholars of that age. So he was proofreading for Aldus. So they were doing documents all in Greek. So they were reading through this stuff like we would read English and marking them up and say, no, we need to go with this other manuscript. And so I think in that time, Revelation would have come past Aldus, and I mean, the thing is, imagine Erasmus not knowing that Aldus has these texts of Revelation. And so the thing is, they have this circular sort of thing where they're saying, well, the Aldine guys just copied from Erasmus. Anyway, they copied from their 1518 text comes from the 1516 text, and they just copied from it. And so the things that Erasmus wanted fixed in his 1516 text come from the 1518 text. So it's actually just this round circle. It's just, to me, it's like that is, I mean, I used to watch, the daftest movies like with Leslie Nielsen in it, where it's just the dumbest scenarios happen. It's like, to me, it's just like that. It just gets all weird. It's like Twilight Zone. You start hearing ding, 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 ding. It's like, can you imagine Erasmus? It's like, it just seems so out of the ordinary that type of thing would happen. And just so many anecdotes around one thing. It just seems like it's almost like every generation, they're like, let's think of the worst possible scenario for this thing to happen. And when I get into this mindset, I just sort of picture, like, I know they picture Erasmus as like Joe Biden. Like, just like, oh, I don't know, what's today, the thing, and he's just making stuff up just to get through the day, just so he can bring in a totalitarian society. But to me, some of these anecdotes and some of these stories that have just come through as genuine, scholars have all agreed. To me, they just seem as dumb as that. And I'm like, hang on, we've got to find some middle ground here. We've got to respect that Erasmus was a world leading scholar. We've got to respect that he was getting examined by critics. Would he say this type of thing? Would he just slip on a banana peel and translate his own work from the Aldine? Would he just make so many blunders and errors and things, or are they blunders and errors, or are we being told this is the only manuscript that he had, especially when he says he had Greek manuscripts plural, and so that's got to be thought about. But I'll just finish this. I'll be comparing the eldest text, um, uh, and examining the history of that manuscript. So looking at Aldous, where did they just copy from Erasmus? So Erasmus's editions, all TR editions. So I did the Collins edition, the 1534, a few days ago, etc. So I hope that gives you an idea of where I'm going. I may need to buy Brown's book and a few others which are in German. And so Andrew Brown has been. So Andrew Brown used to be part of the Trinitarian Bible Society. He went towards a majority text position. Now, D.A. Waite, he did quite a few videos against Brown. I think it was in the 90s, and or it could have been in the noughties. But he was pretty clear that he was a majority text guy, basically sitting in a seat of a Trinitarian Bible Society position. And so I listened through D.A. Waite's audios on that probably about 10 years ago, where he's talking about Andrew Brown, trying to bring in majority text concepts, Byzantine text concepts. So Andrew Brown's sort of gone from the Trinitarian Bible Society, and he's writing books for Brill. And he's in 2013, he's written volume 4 of Erasmus, and this deals with the 1 John 5:7 issue and also these last 6 verses issue. And so that's probably a book that I'm like, the amazing thing is a lot of this stuff's just online. So, I've got so many books about Erasmus. I've got like 40 books just sitting there on my hard drive, and it's hard to know where to go and what to actually look at and who to trust, But yeah, I'm sort of hoping that, I'd like to say with Jan Kranz, he just threw he's up online on Archive and a few other places, and so it's quite accessible. I'm hoping that happens, but what I find is the more I debate this online, people are like, yeah, but Andrew Brown said this. I'm like grabbing that and go, Andrew Brown said that. It's like his book is like $250 or something American. It's like it's huge, and I mean I'm running a church in Africa, and it's like they've got so many kids there. They're going through all this Corona thing, and I mean it's hard enough for us in the West, when they stop you working and they lock you down and all that. And over there they're like double strict. They'll bash you in the street and things. And also in Pakistan we run Sunday school ministries, and my brother-in-law runs that, and so it's like to buy a book that's that expensive, it just seems like it just doesn't make sense, But the thing is, some things like this, I know that like with Revelation 16:5, I get people contacting me all the time saying, "Thanks so much for clearing that up." It was just like this thing in the back of their mind, like, "Oh, that's an error, and now they're like, "Man, you've cleared that up for me." So I'm hoping that this ends up being like that we just clear up a whole bunch of stuff. And so what I want to do now is I want to read through. I'm going to have to find it on Facebook actually, but I'm going to read through what Timothy Berg said is the position, because I thought it was well written. It was really well done, and even Tommy Wasserman jumped on there and said, "Wow," because he said, "Oh, look, I don't have much time for this, blah blah blah," and then he just wrote this really good, concise evaluation of the issues of what critical text people think about this. And so we want to go, okay, that's what they think. We don't want to misrepresent them. I mean, hopefully I'm not misrepresenting them by, saying what I'm saying now. I know that I'm going against some things, but rightfully so. I mean, to just assume that Erasmus made these type of errors, I mean, to me, that's not. These guys are accusing one of the greatest linguists ever, one of the greatest translators ever, one of the driving forces behind even the Reformation and the Reformation text and the Bible and everything. And it's like, oh, he just made these type of crazy errors. And it's like they're willing to say that about him. But I say, oh, Jan Kranz has made this error. And they're like, hey, don't you dare talk about the scholarship like that. And it's like, can't you see that I'm actually coming against you guys saying that about other scholars, you know? And look, the thing is, I'm not tied to Erasmus either. I mean, a lot of people, they look at this and just go, oh, I just go with Beza, or I just go with King James guys, or I just go with Stephanus. But this issue has been sort of cloaked, or it's presented as like, okay, here we have the foundation of the TR, and so if these words are back translated, you know, from the Latin, and then there was this banana peel moment where he thought he fixed it, but he didn't, and then it still remained in the text, and they, you know, Doug Kudlick would say they slavishly just copied it all the way through to the King James. You know, then it's like, oh well, is the King James trustworthy? You know, and so it's one of those type of things where it's not just dealing with this one little issue; it's dealing with a whole bunch of, you know, this is one of the key things where people in like the 18th century, 19th century in England that with Bengal, Whetstone, Griesbach, you know, Tischendorf, you know, these guys were talking about this sort of stuff and just saying, look, see these errors are in there. You can't trust the TR, and that was the birth of the critical text, you know. And so I'm going to find these words of Timothy Berg. So it might take just a second. Here we go. No, didn't take long at all. And so where are we? Okay. Now, obviously, okay, I'll just read it. But he does go point form. I might give you another picture. Whoops. I'll go back here. Okay. There's France Delitzsch there. Interesting looking guy. Not the most handsome guy, but so I was writing to Emmanuel M. Vicente. I think he must be from the Philippines or something like that. And Timothy Berg wrote, I don't have time to write a lot more here. Suffice to say that Nick and I disagree about the historical reconstruction. I'm open to being persuaded of his reconstruction if he can provide arguments that that it better explains the data. And so I guess that's the thing. Like these guys have had this story going from, you know, Franz Delitzsch all the way through to today, and it's like I'm like, hang on, there's holes in it here. It doesn't mean that I have an elaborate story on my side. I'm just pointing out there's problems, and so I guess that's the thing is he's like, well, so where's your story? And it's like, well, actually, most TR King James people have just accepted this story. That's what I find. Like say, you know, Brown, he did sort of capitulated in a sense and gone to a Byzantine type of thing, but he was already like that back in the 90s anyway. But if I was to go through, say, King James Version Defended by Hill, Edward F. Hills, I'll just quickly look up what he's got here. Page 202. I know I've got it on my website. 202. He has, if any man should take away from the words of this prophecy, etc. According to Hoskia, all the Greek manuscripts, except possibly one or two, read Tree of Life. The Textus Receptus reads Book of Life, with the Latin Vulgate, including the very old Vulgate manuscript F, the Baharic version Ambrose, who died in 397, and the commentaries of Promasius, 6th century, and Hamo, 9th century. This is one of the verses which Erasmus is said to have translated from Latin into Greek. But Hoskier seems to doubt that Erasmus did this, suggesting that he may have followed Codex 141. So Codex 141 is the one that I was looking at just before. So that's this one here. So Hoskier's 141, and so that's minuscule 2049. So yeah, so I'm putting that information there just so we can clear up that type of confusion, because it seems like there was a bit of confusion about that. And so when we go through that issue, so he's got quite a lot written about this. So I won't read through it all, but I'll just sort of say that, like, he's what I find. I'm not saying Hills has actually written this. I should really read it, but I'm assuming that this is what he's written, because a lot of confessional bibliology guys who come from that vein, what I find is if there's not a strong argument for something, it's like, well, okay, we follow the providence of God. Now, I'm not saying that that's not a good thing to do, because, I mean, do we expect that every human on earth needs to do this type of in-depth study to just get the word of God? No. We believe that the sheep hear the voice of the shepherd, that when I read through that, it resonates with me, Book of Life, and and I can understand Erasmus saying it's homoiouton, and I can understand those things. And to me, before I knew all these issues, I was reading through that going, that makes sense, that makes sense, and it was something that the church has accepted, and so that's the confessional bibliology type of thing. It's like, okay, well, it's been accepted by the church. The word of God will follow the church, and that sort of thing. I'm not really giving the confessional bibliology guys and presuppositionalists a good. I'm not defending them properly here. I'm just fudging this, but I think you sort of know where I'm going with that. Anyway, I'll stick to what I was saying. I'm just going to read through this from Timothy Berg. He says, but the standard one that all Erasmus scholars currently accept is that one. Erasmus temporarily borrowed 2414, so that's the Reuchlins Codex, the one that I was showing you on James Snap's website there. So that type of thing. I don't think that's the actual page, the last page, but I was looking at the last page the other day. It's quite interesting. Actually, I do have it. Let's go to desktop. Last 6 verses. No, I'll be searching forever. So anyway, that James Snap one and that picture will have to suffice. I had a copy of 2814 made so that he could. Oh, sorry, he had a copy of 2814 so he could return the manuscript. Actually, I've just skipped a line. I did some homoiouton on myself. Sorry about that. Erasmus temporarily borrowed the Reuchlins Codex from Reuchlin, which was his only manuscript of Revelation when editing the 1516 edition. So this is where later on, this is the main issue, because later on in 1520, when he's talking to Lee, he says, well, in our Greek copies, plural, in his annotations of 1516, he actually says, hang on, I've got to get this correct. So this is where my website comes in good, because I don't want to make these type of errors. Oops. That's Vala's work, so we're going through that as well. Okay, so that's the answer to Lee. But we want to look at here first. Okay, so he has, however, at the end of this book, I found some words which were lacking in the Greek copies, plural. So that's in his annotations, in his 1516 annotations. In 1519, 22, 27, 35, he took those out. And so you can see I've gone through the annotations here and showing where he says it in the first one, 1516, where he has copies. So the Graecus exemplaribus. And then in the next one, he doesn't have that note. He's taken that note completely out. And so, in the rest of them, he takes the note. That's why I've got the little arrows there. He takes that out. And so, but he does say copies plural. So that's got to be taken into consideration that he said he had copies. I'll just go back up to the English of this, and I've got to check the English of this. This is something that I've got to look at. However, at the end of this book, I found some words, not verses, just some words in our versions that were lacking from the Greek copy. So when he's talking about the words here, he later on describes it that it was just to do with Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, not 6 verses. He clearly says that it's only just to do with those. The whole 6 verses thing has come about later on, where people are like, okay, we found this manuscript and it doesn't have the last 6 verses. This is the manuscript that he used. And it's like, that's why I'm like, hang on, we have to question, is that the manuscript? That's why I'm doing it. I'm not just, and I've just got to question everything about this whole story, because it's sort of like, I just know that if I can spot a few boils on the skin and all the rest of it as a doctor, you're like, okay, let's see what's behind that. Is there cancer behind that? Is there just a big lie behind this whole thing? Did Delitzsch just make up of this story and it's just been accepted, and people aren't diligently, honing in on this? So point 2, he had a copy of 2841 made so he could return the manuscript. So this is the concept where he had the extraction of the biblical text, like who extracted it. Because we see that when I was chatting to Timothy Berg, from it I had the words copied out. So it's like, okay, he had someone else do it. And Andrew Brown, so this is where I was like, oh, thanks, Timothy. You gave me a little bit of Andrew Brown's material. I'll keep that $250 American in my pocket at the moment. It's like, man, someone sent me that. Did I say that? Because of the promise that the manuscript would be returned to Rockland. So this is Andrew Brown, the guy who used to be Trinitarian Bible Society. Because of the promise that the manuscript will be returned to Rockland unharmed in contaminatus, Erasmus instructed an assistant to copy the scripture citations by hand, as to form a separate continuous text, which the typesetters would be able to follow more easily. He's got the Latin there. From the manuscript, we arranged the words of the scripture text to be copied out. So notice he even has we there. So this is what I was showing before, earlier, where I had, that's the Christian hospitality one. Okay, so that's Rummel, also Erica Rummel. And then we got this one from Andrew Brown. And so from what we could ensure from that manuscript, the words that belong together, we arranged the words of the scripture were correctly transcribed, text to be copied out. And Rummel has, from it, I had the words of the text copied out. So notice it's I had the words copied out, but it's like we arranged. And then it's like we arranged. So you notice that it's like from that we could ensure that it's plural. And see, the thing is, it's how we perceive that in English, and this is where these are 3 different Latin translations of that, and that causes either Erasmus got an assistant to do it or he did it himself. If the assistant did it, then young Crans is like, see, it's a whole nother layer of errors. He probably, who did he get? And that's what I was saying to Timothy Berg, and he graciously gave us, some of these answers from Erica Rummel. Rummel said, since the text was embedded in the commentary and difficult to read, Erasmus had a clean copy made, returning the original to its owner. The unknown copyist introduced a number of mistakes that made their way into the printed text. So that's Rummel. And in a footnote, she said Bladu suggests that it was the poet Londrete Hendricus Clarenius, who was in Basel at the time and whose scholarly abilities Erasmus appreciated. So she's even naming someone. And so this is where it's like, where do we get this secondary guy from? And maybe there's other things that I need to look at, but I'm going to put as much information just on that one thing in there. Now, and what I'm saying to you guys too, I know some of you guys watching, you guys love to study and you're into it. Pick a thing, minuscule 2814. Start going through that for me. I've got so much I need to write about that. Valor. I mean, I don't know that much about valor. I know he mentions it in Revelation chapter 8, verse 13, that he used valor's annotations, and valor used a whole bunch of manuscripts as well. So it'd be interesting to find out what he used and how this influenced Erasmus and things like that. Then we got Erasmus's annotations, and then we got there's just so many different topics there that we could look at. I mean, I haven't even gone into Bengel. Oh, I've got a little bit there. So Bengel actually prophesied Jesus would come on the 18th of June, 1836. I mean, and the story of the last 6 verses seems to go back to him. And this guy was falsely prophesying that Jesus would come. I mean, is this whole thing coming from a false prophet? You know what I mean? That could play into it as well. Where are we? Okay, so anyway, back to number 3 from Timothy Berg. The last 6, 5.5 really, verses of Revelation are missing from 2.8.14 because there was a leaf missing. Not the final leaf, as some suppose, but the leaf containing the final text of Revelation. Erasmus thus translated from Latin into Greek these verses. So one of the things that I've been toying with or thinking about is that maybe when Erasmus or his aide or both of them, when we or I or the other guy did it, was the back translation to do with that? Did they produce the last 6 verses from there? But then when I read through, Erasmus never said anything about 6 verses. He only claimed 1 verse. So this is where the whole 6 verses thing is just sort of cropped up. And to me, these are 2 separate issues. You have Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, where Erasmus clearly says, this is what Erasmus says is the issue. He says, but our impression was that a scribe had made a mistake in that instance. Hang on, here we are. I'll read this whole thing. Because the book of Revelation never particularly suited the Greeks, it is rarely found among them. I'll make it nice and big so you can see it. Okay, that's better. Okay, so because the book of Revelation, I'll just see where my head is. Okay, good, I'm down the bottom there. Because the book of Revelation is never particularly suited the Greeks, it is rarely found among them. So we know that the Greeks, they were like, oh, is Revelation, part of our canon or not, or whatever. And so since we were desirous that our edition should be remiss in no respect, with considerable effort, we extorted out of that illustrious man, John Capino, a very ancient codex, which contained a commentary to this work. So he's talking about the Andreas commentary. From that we could ensure that the words that belong together were correctly transcribed. But at the end, listen, this is exactly what Erasmus says is the issue. But at the end, the following words were missing by a scribal error. And so he's talking about homoioteuton. Like I was saying, you have the same word, you can skip a line. And it says, and if anyone should take away from the words of the prophecy of this book, God shall take his part out of the book of life and from the holy city and from those things that are written in this book. So he's written that, and he says, but our impression was that a scribe made a mistake in that instance, since the word in this book occurred twice. His eyes passed involuntarily over to the latter occurrence, thus omitting the phrases in between, homoioteuton. And indeed, book writers make no mistake more frequently than this. There was no doubt that these words had been omitted by error and that their number was small. So just look at that. And indeed, book writers make no mistake more frequently than this. Erasmus knew, this is common. There was no doubt these words had been omitted by error. And so he's saying this is a scribal error. It's not like the last page is missing or whatever. And that their number was small. So I think it was 135 words are in the last 6 verses or 5.5 verses or whatever that critical text guys are claiming Erasmus back translated. But Erasmus is clearly talking about the book, and he's saying in this book, and so he's talking about in the Greek there. He says, therefore, to avoid a gap in the text, we made good the Greek from our Latin copies. But since we did not want this to escape the notice of the reader, we made mention of what we had done in the annotations. So in his 1516 annotations, he mentions this. So that if our words differed in any way from those which the author of this work originally set down here, the reader, once having procured a copy, would be able to restore the original. So, this whole thing has been quite confusing to me, but I believe that I've become clear in what this is talking about. So basically, Erasmus is just saying this is to do with Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. In this manuscript of Reuchlin, this was homoioteuton. I recognize that the book and book, the two words were the same, and so they skipped, and it says only a few words, so it's like a verse or half a verse. And to avoid that gap, he put that back in from the Latin. So he's saying here, because the book of Revelation never particularly suited the Greeks, it is rarely found among them. And so since we would desire so that our edition would be remiss in that respect, okay, but at the end, the following words were missing by a scribal error. And so now he's put in his Aldine text. But the thing is, see, this is where it comes down to the critical text guys are saying that it was the 1518 Aldine text that Erasmus, he put in his annotations in 1516 what he'd done. Then after 1518, the Aldine text came out, and then his 1519 in Erasmus' second edition, he's fixed it and there's no more problem. But what's been brought forth, like say from the website of Christian Hospitality, is that this text is in 1516. It's not talking about the Aldine edition, the printed edition, but it's talking about the draft that they had. Because here's Erasmus and Aldus, pretty much best mates. He used to work for the guy. He got a whole bunch of books printed by Aldus. So he's living with the guy. They're printing books together. He's proofreading for him. He's part of the Byzantine school. There's like 5,000 Greeks in Venice at the time. They're all, they know these guys. They're printing. if you just type into YouTube who Aldous was, um, you'll see that he's just an absolute legend when it comes to Greek. Like I mean, world class. I mean, it's like he's up there with one of the best guys for Greek, and so his Erasmus just happens to be best mates with the guy. And so he's like, okay, the Aldine guys, but the thing is, many times we read into that the Aldine 1518 edition, and so this is what I've got to clear up. The whole issue, is it a pre-draft or is it the Aldine edition that got fixed? And so the guys from Christian Hospitality, they ask a lot of questions, and I'm like, man, they are really good questions. And I'm trying to constantly go through their page and get a good grasp of this whole concept, because it's so far out of the box of what everyone else is saying that it's like sometimes I'm intermingling things and getting confused with the two. But that's a good place to be, because that means I'm learning, I'm in an uncomfortable position, and I'm like, I'm not having cognitive dissonance where I'm just like, oh, but that doesn't fit with this and that. I'm just going, okay, well, okay, I'm going to have to study this thing out and get that in concrete. This little thing there in concrete, that thing in there, and then just build what I'm talking about today. But you can see why I've got issues with the whole thing, because he says that it was in the Greek plural, etc. So let's move on from there. Erasmus explained what he did in the annotation to the 1516, which was removed in all latter editions. So that's correct. We just looked at that. Edward Lee. So Edward Lee, he was just like a critic. He used to, I think he was the son of like the Lord Mayor or something in England. He was a scholar, but apparently he knew Erasmus. Erasmus lived in England for a while too. And he knew Erasmus, but then he sort of started coming against him and was just attacking him. So he raised hundreds of criticisms of Erasmus. One of these was the back translating here. So he said you shouldn't have back translated. But when he's talking about back translation, they weren't talking about 6 verses. Lee and Erasmus were arguing about the Book of Life issue. And so, number 7, for the second edition, so this is Timothy Berg saying this, for the second edition, Erasmus asked the printers to correct this back translation using the 1518 Aldine edition. So that's where the Christian Hospitality guys are saying, no, it wasn't the 1518 Aldine edition, it was the pre-printed edition, and they probably had that ready in 1516, and Erasmus had used that, or use what the Aldine guys have, maybe perhaps their manuscripts and things like that. So that's one of the things that has been brought up and put on the table, and it's like, okay, let's look at this. There is some open debate, but most scholars accept that the Aldine edition, unbeknownst to Erasmus, was actually largely simply the text of Erasmus. So this is the whole concept that if it is the 1518 edition, Erasmus in his 1519 just went, okay, let's fix it from that edition, but it's actually just the text of the Aldine. So he's tricked himself, you know. He's had the Joe Biden moment where he's like, I think we fixed it. Did anyone fix that? And it's like, but then later on he's arguing, we did fix it, you know. But it's supposed to be 6 verses instead of the 1 verse that he actually talked about, according to the critical text guys. So this is not identical in every place, but so similar that it could be regarded as a form of plagiarism. I wouldn't say that. I would say that Aldous, Erasmus, these guys were such good friends that I don't think that this even plagiarism wouldn't have even come into their radar. Thus, Erasmus was corrected using Erasmus. So this is their anecdote. Erasmus corrected it using his own text that he didn't realize the guys from Aldous used. So it's this anecdote, and he now thought he had a supported text when he did. Okay, so number 9, Erasmus made 2 replies to Lee in 15 20, the Apologia, and Rea Poncio. In both, he responded to charges about this passage. The first is a brief note that explains, as part of his defense against Lee, that he only had one manuscript revelation, and that it was lacking at the end 1 or 2 lines that could easily be restored. So I'm just going to read that again because it's worded a bit chunky. So in his 2 replies to Lee, in both he responded to the charges about this passage. The first is a brief note that explains, as part of his defense against Lee, that he only had one manuscript of Revelation and that it was lacking at the end 1 or 2 lines that could easily be restored. He explains that he asked the Basel printers to restore the reading from the Aldine edition, which he hadn't bought yet. And so this is where the Christian Hospitality guys are saying, no, it's not the Aldine edition, it's just from the Aldine. So that the edition thing is Erica Rummel's thing on it, it's Jan Kranz's thing on it. It's just they're reading into that, they're paraphrasing what they think it should be. So that's when Timothy Berg is showing me, well, what about this and what about that? How he's talking about the Aldine edition. I'm like, well, I've got to look at the Latin of that. I'm so distrustful of the Latin issues. I mean, we just went through this. I mean, that's just one tiny little speck of an issue, but it creates quite another layer of errors. Okay, so back to Timothy Berg. The second later note is a little longer, and in it he mentions that a section was missing. But now he specifically cited verse 19 and writes as though only verse 19 was missing. He suggests that it was simply due to a scribal error and points out that he had already made the reader aware of the omission in his annotations in 1516. A few things don't seem to fit perfectly here. So this is Berg still speaking. For one, 2814 is missing the last 5.5 verses, not because of scribal error, but because the whole leaf is missing. For another Erasmus states explicitly, I think there's an error there, that he only had one manuscript. For Erasmus states explicitly that he only had one manuscript of Revelation, but he does at several points use the plural when speaking of his manuscripts. So this is the whole thing. He's saying we had in our manuscripts we saw this error. So in his Greek manuscripts we saw this error. So if this is a back translation, so then it's like if this is a back translation of the Latin, then it's his own Greek that he's seeing this error in. And then it's like, it's just anecdote after anecdote, and to me, it's just there's too many. It's like, hang on. Let's just wind it back a bit. Let's just think logically here that perhaps this whole story about him doing all this is just you guys are reading it wrong. If it gets to the point where the Three Stooges appear and they're poking each other in the eye and slapping each other on the head and stuff like that, it's like, hang on, let's just wind this back a little bit and let's just re-examine what we're looking at. Berg continues. Every Erasmus scholar I know of concludes that Erasmus was simply mistaken in his final note when explaining the reason for the missing section, or that he was making it sound like it was only a single verse to downplay the extent of the problem, a natural response in the face of Lee's criticism. So this is where, say, someone like Kranz is saying, okay, so here we have Erasmus, he's made all these problems, he's done all these mistakes. What's he going to do? No, he's going to go into detail about homoouteleuton and talk about all this sort of stuff as a cover for, he doesn't want everyone to know the last 6 verses have been done, because that would cause the TR just to be rejected, and people will say you're back translated. One of the other interesting things is in the Christian Hospitality website, is they talk about in Erasmus's 1535 edition. He, just like John Mill, he claims that the text of Vaticanus is a back translation from the Latin, and so he believes that it was done for that purpose. It was in the Council of Florence when they invited the Greeks into the church, that they did a back translation from the Latin and all this sort of stuff. And so he rejected it as a back translation. And so one of the things is Erasmus, he despised this whole concept of back translating into Latin. It was one of the things that he was sort of known for. So this is what the Christian Hospitality website is going on about. One of the things is, I'll just look up. Okay, so answer to Edward Lee's annotations. So Erasmus says, not content with that, he, Lee, accused me of an impious crime, that in the end of Revelation I added a small number of words in a Greek codex from our Latin copies. So he's complaining about Lee, and he's, like it says, this is what I've got on my website, historically Erasmus had stood against back translating and was disgusted to have been accused of it in his text. So he was saying it's not a back translation in a sense. He's saying it's homoiouton. He's gone to the Latin and he's filled in words there that he believes were missing through homoiouton in his Greek manuscripts. So so you have someone talking about, it's a bit like if I was talking about a car and I'm talking about the engine, and I'm saying, okay, and I'm talking about intricate details of the engine. And then someone comes along and says, well, Nick was talking about the tires and he was talking about the glass and he was talking about the leather seats and the radio. And it's like, I didn't mention any of that. And so this is one of the things that there's two issues here. Erasmus is talking about one verse. The scholarly consensus today is Erasmus was talking about 6 verses, but sort of covering it up, and Lee sort of cornered him here and he's sort of gone and made up a whole bunch of stuff. And because this manuscript has been found with the last 6 verses, people are, oh, there's 6 verses that Erasmus missed. That's why I'm like, okay, I'm questioning, is this the manuscript? Is this, or has something else happened here? Or and so that's why I have to go through the whole story and redo it. And so you can understand why there's confusion about this, because even just to understand the critical text view on this, you have to believe the banana peel scenarios and all the rest of it. And it's like, if you're not inclined to do those things, if you have more respect for, like, look, I'm not a Calvinist, but I have respect for Calvin as a scholar. I read through his stuff and go, wow, that's interesting. Wow, he knows his stuff. He knows his Latin. He knows his history. That's very interesting stuff, And so I'm not just going to make up a thing like, because I'm not a Calvinist, like, oh, Calvin just did this and did that, and he was just the Three Stooges scenario with him. It's like when I look at Erasmus's stuff, I'm in respect for this guy. Like, okay, this guy's done a very good job, and he's done this and done that. Where I find on the other side, people are reading it like Joe Biden's there, and they're just seeing this dimwit. They're seeing this idiot who just didn't really care about everything. And see, that's where, when I'm talking about the Olim issue, so Olim. So I go through and I even put, dictionary definition of Olim and what it means and everything. So Erica Rummel, I might go down, actually I'll go back up. So like I pointed out earlier, this thing, its author has long since been unknown by Crans. So in other words, Erasmus didn't believe that John wrote Revelation. Or Eric Rummel saying the authorship was once uncertain, saying the Greeks, they were Like, we're not sure if it's from John, and they rejected it. Um, just those two things show me that there's contention in the Latin, and that whole thing blows it to the point where there's a whole nother thing where Krans will continually say Erasmus didn't really care about the text, and James White parrots that. Like, Erasmus was like, whatever. Oh, it's only the Book of Revelation. It's only the end of the book. I don't really care. I've got other things to do. I'm bored, sort of thing. Where it's like just that one word, olim, has created that. That's what I'm saying. It's like a funnel. You got this one little thing, and it's like this funnel into it's spreading. It's creating this huge big bubble of untruth. It's like, man, did he really disrespect the Book of Revelation that much? Because then I was talking about this issue, and Kranz jumped on Facebook and said, no, there's other places where he said that. But then it's like, who do I trust? Because I don't trust Eric Rummel. I don't trust Jan Kranz. There's other, sometimes they're correct, sometimes they're not. And these are the things that I'm going to have to translate into Latin. So, anyway, so I think I read that last thing. I'll just read this last one again because I'm not sure if I read it or not. So this is the last thing of Timothy Berg. Nick, on the other, hang on. No, that's when he starts talking about me and how I don't really have a concrete story, so he can't be convinced of what I'm saying. Every Erasmus scholar I know concludes that Erasmus was simply mistaken in his final note when explaining the reason for his missing section, or that he was making it sound like it was only a single verse to downplay the extent of the problem. A natural response in the face of Lee's criticism. I did read that. So it's sort of, he can understand why scholars are like, well, Erasmus is just making up stories. We know that it's 6 verses. He's saying it's 1 verse. The manuscript stops at Revelation chapter 22, verse 16, and he's basically talking about Revelation chapter 19, saying he saw homoouteriton there. We think Erasmus is making these stories up, or he's having a Joe Biden moment. That's what the whole issue comes down to. And so I don't believe that narrative. I think that we've got to question everything on this. And I'm inviting TR people, KJV people, whatever you want to call yourself or label yourself. If if you've gone through this video and you've seen things that I'm saying wrong, or you're thinking Nick needs to know this, needs to read this article, I've contacted quite a few people over the last few days, and I've had some really good response. People just saying, hey, what about this? What about that? And I know too that it's taken me quite a while just to get my head around this whole issue. Like I was saying at the beginning, I'm good at details, but sometimes the broader picture it can get past me, And everyone's got their strengths and weaknesses. Some people are good at art, some people are good at coding. Some people are good at both. Some people aren't good at either. But it's like, we've just got to go on our strengths. I'm good at details and things like that. But I'm trying to get the bigger picture, just like I did with Revelation 16:5. It takes a long time to get there, and it's a harder journey going through all those details, rather than coming from a bigger picture and sort of trying to hone it in a bit. I'm going through, okay, well, let's start with these Latin things. Let's see if they're translated correctly for starters. Let's look at the original source documents. Let's look at exactly what Erasmus says. Let's compile everything that Erasmus says about this. And thankfully, a lot of this work's been done. With Revelation 16:5, there was hardly anything done. It was like James White's one was like the most that was written about it, which was nearly everything he said was wrong. So anyway, I'm going to check and see if there is some comments on this. So let's have a look. YouTube. Great, we've got some comments. Sean Cheatham, just comparing Erasmus's first and second edition nailed it for me. They're different in the last 6 verses. How can it be that the back copying was never fixed? Okay, so that's where I've got to go through, and so that's the thing. I'm checking absolutely everything. So it's taking me a long time to go through these things, but I've got to go through the 15, 16, 15, 19 editions. Now I know that Kranz, he does do this. Where am I? That's page. He does do this at the end in his appendix. He has, oh no, he actually compares 15, 16 with the majority text, I think it is, your modern critical text, sorry. So he's comparing that, where, yeah, like you're saying, it would be good to compare Erasmus's 15, 16 to the 15, 19. So that's where I guess I've got to go in that direction. And really good point. If you've said that that has nailed it for you, then that just that thing can sort out a whole bunch of issues. Because perhaps I've been wrong in believing what Christian Hospitality website's saying, where they're saying that it's a pre-printed Aldine edition or the manuscripts. Perhaps it is actually something that he put into the um, 1516 and it was fixed in the 1519. So that's where I've got to go. Okay, well, I've got to look at that, and that's part of that evidence. So really appreciate that comment, and that's sparking a few good thoughts. And that would mean that he only had one manuscript for 1516. But then it doesn't answer where he says he had great copies, plural. So that's but yeah, I'll definitely look at that. Okay, so Stephen Hayes, watching from Idaho, great topic. Thanks, Stephen. And I know when I went through all the King James debate stuff recently, and Stephen Boyce's stuff, and Nathan Cravatin, I was like, oh, I'm going to continue down that road. I think I just started studying this in the last few weeks. And I was like, well, I may as well talk about this rather than change gears and just sort of. And I don't want to bore you guys, and I don't want to bore myself. And it just seemed like this topic was hot, and so it's like I just seem to be going down this way. The Mark chapter 1 verse 2 issue 2 and 3. I guess I'm doing the same as what I'm doing here. I'm compiling information, so I guess there's no point me bringing up a huge conclusion until I've compiled that information. So I'll continue doing that, and also the issue of the Septuagint and Luke chapter 4. That's also on the back burner. So just letting you guys know that I haven't forgotten those issues, but they're just going to be on the back burner for a little while. I'm just going to focus on this because this is what's happening. Lots of people giving me info, so I'm going to be reading tons of info on this and studying this as much as I possibly can. Matthew Murphy Rose, he says, Scribner was not critical text, Nick. Come on. Okay, so when I go through Scribner's editions of introduction, in his earlier editions, he's saying, okay, there's 20. I can't remember the exact number. He's like 20 places where I would change the Textus Receptus, and then at the end of his life, it's like there's like 40, 50 places where he would change it. He mightn't have gone to the place where he's deleting the last 12 verses of Mark or Pericope Adulterae, but definitely 1 John 5:7's out. Definitely he's going through and amending the text more than majority text people. He is sort of half between majority text and critical text, and he was on the Westcott and Hort Translation Committee. I mean, how can anyone who had any conviction about the text be on that committee with Unitarians creating this text and lending your scholarly credentials and your name to this group of people? To me, it was, Dean Burgon was like, no way, I'm not going to be a part of that. And so, but for me, Scrivener was not a TR person. Neither was Dean Burgon. Dean William Burgon, he believed in the traditional text, which was like a majority text type of thing, a Byzantine text. And so Hoskier, he wasn't a TR person like Beezer or the King James translators or myself, or he had like a majority text type of thing. There were places where he believed the TR could be amended and fixed and things like that. And so and Miller, he seemed to be of the same school as Scrivener and Burgon, and they believed that the Textus Receptus needed amending, and that's very clear by Dean John William Burgon going through from Matthew chapter 1 to chapter 14 and having, I think it was like 150 changes to the Textus Receptus. He said he's not defending the Textus Receptus. He's defending that traditional text. They're different. And so when you're saying Scrivener was not critical text, Nick, come on. I didn't say he was purely critical text. I said he was one of the driving forces behind the critical text, because he was coming across as like, oh, I'm an expert on the authorized version, but we need to delete all these verses. We need to change this and amend this, and it was like there's not much difference between what he was saying and what critical text people were saying. And it's not as extreme, but it was heading in that direction. So critical text light, Be separate says blessing. Stephen Hayes says James White has seriously slandered Erasmus on the issue of the ending of Revelation. White is seriously in jeopardy of coming under the curses of Revelation, chapter 22, verses 18 and 19. And so, and then he says, ironic that it is this very text White is attacking. And then T.L. Oates says, watching from Texas. So, yeah, Stephen, I think the thing is, too, is like, deceivers deceive and they are deceived and they deceive and are being deceived. I think that's how the King James words it. So it's like we just think deceivers, they know the truth and they're just like, here's the truth, but I'm just going to twist it. Many times they're deceived themselves. And so I would say that people like Jan Kranz, James White looks up Jan Kranz like he is just gold. He is like a Christian Bart Ehrman sort of thing. And he's said things like, it's just his text is neutral and he's beyond what is written is a one volume destruction against the Textus Receptus, and the amazing thing is, like someone like Jeff Riddle, he just pulls him up and says, but he's got a totally different bibliology than you. He's got a totally different way of looking at text criticism, where they're not trying to find the original text. James White's like, I want what Mark wrote, I want what Paul wrote, I want what Jesus said, and all this stuff. And it's like, well, those guys definitely aren't doing that. And it seems like James White didn't even know that. But I think, coming from a perspective where I've looked at this issue at what James White's saying is very confusing. And I think some of the confusion has actually gotten on me. And I'm like, that's strange, because he was even saying that it was a Latin commentary that had Greek written in it. And so I think it was, here it is in the text of the Gospels with, this picture here of James White. He, Erasmus, had to extract the Greek text from the Latin commentary on Revelation. It's like, wrong. And, when he's mocking this sort of thing, because he's sort of half learnt it and he's just saying stuff. But the thing is, it's like, because James White says so many things wrong about it, if you're learning this issue from him, you sort of, like all the stuff that I've explained today, it's filtered through him and it's more confusing, and he's creating all these other errors on top of it, and it would just leave you in utter confusion. And so, but yeah, so basically the main guy saying this, it's a whole group of guys, but the main guy printing it and coming out with this sort of stuff is Kranz, but also I guess Andrew Brown and a few others. But I've really got to see exactly what they've said about it, because some people like Timothy Berg is like, well, this is what the scholars are saying, but I'm not absolutely sure as yet. There's still a few questionable areas and things like that, and that's good. I'm glad for that type of honesty about that. But when you're saying what is seriously in jeopardy of coming under the curses of Revelation 22:18-19, absolutely. This is dealing with one of the core issues. And so the thing is, Book of Life in the Latin. And so this is the thing. Historically, people who in that age were experts in Greek, they knew what the Greeks believed. They were hanging around the Greeks. And the Greeks are like, look, most people haven't really got into the Book of Revelation. That it goes against our church. It goes against this and that, and we didn't like it. And so they're like, well, obviously the Latin is better. So they're looking at the Latin manuscripts, and so they're going to the Latin and they're seeing Book of Life all the way through it. So this is one of the things where I've got 2 pages here, Revelation 22, 16 to 21, the last 6 verses of Revelation. But then we've also jumping over to 19 here. So where we've got Vivlo or Vivlo Tes Zois, Book of Life. And that's where I'm building up a case for that one as well. So, I mean, that might be somewhere where, like say here, take away his part out of the Book of Life. Okay, so Meros. So I've got to clear this up a little bit, but I've found this and I just sort of copied that there. But you have no part of me, and how you would translate part. And Book of Life, King James Version, Book of Life, Tree of Life, etc. Yeah, so then we've got things like old versions. So I've just gone through, say, something like Will Kinney's site or KJV Today or Stephen Avery's material, and it's like Old Latin and Bohairic Coptic contain the word book. And so then it's like, okay, let's go through the Latin Vulgate, going through that. So that's where I really would love to get all of these pictures on the side down here. So we're not just dealing with speculation, because sometimes, this information has been copied from, say, in awe of thy word or something like that. And it's like there might be something wrong there or error or whatever. Or, even critical text guys, they can get it wrong and they can say it's not in something when it is, or it is in something where it's not, or even Hoskia. And so, we've got quite a few things. Okay, so in the Bohairic Coptic, here, I'll just open that up. So this is the Bohairic Coptic here. And so I think that was the word that is a book. That word there, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, I've got to look more into that. But there is a translation of that. Which says, but he who will cut off from the words of this book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part from the book of the life and the holy city which are written in this book. So it does say the book, and so that's quite interesting. But I don't know that much about the Bohairic Coptic, so that's something that I need to expand on. Yeah, so that's the word there, which is, it was that word that I was looking at, his book. Interesting. So then you got Hymo halberstadensis, and he's got his interesting information there, Libero there, but I need to expand on that. And then we're going through Erasmus's stuff, and this is pretty much the same stuff that I've got on my last 6 verses page. So then I'm going through commentaries, John Gill, a marginal note added to the King James Version, or the Tree of Life. People put that in there just so people know, because some people are, it's in the original marginal notes. And so you can go through and see when they put that in. It's not part of the original 1611 or Blaney's or anything. It was just an addition. But these ones have the same marginal notes. So there's guys who have gone through and studied all that, and I'm like, thank you, and just put it in my page. Because I want as much information as possible. Albert Barnes, Adam Clark, Scrivener. So these are things that I really need to go through. And even Hoskia, he goes through the different verses. Say in 22:16, what I might do, I will leave that page open and I'll go to 19 there. So I've got both of them open. I'll go back down to Hoskia. She's got 22:19 here, where he clearly talks about, bibliu, apobibliu, sulo, vibliu, sulo, going through those things there and who's got it. It's Ambrose, Hamo, a few other guys, the Arabic. So this is where it's like, okay, I'm going to have to look through Walton's polyglot. And I had a page open last night and there was like about 50 tabs open. So and they were all, I was like, I've got to shut down at least 10 of these. And I was going through them like, no, I've got to read that. I've got to read that. I was like, I can't shut down any of them. So I actually just saved the whole lot as bookmarked the whole lot. So when I go through that bookmark, it'll open up 50 pages. It's like, but yeah, so we're looking at, Aleph, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, B and E, and so other things. And so that's just to do with 22:19. But when we go back here, we've got 22:16. Actually, I think it's in the Hoskia section. Sorry if I'm boring you. I'm going to close this down in a minute. Hoskia, yes. So here, it's 22:16, where he says, it's in Latin, so I'll read the translation of it. However, we added those words from Latin, Erasmus wrote. So Hoskia believes that these words from verse 16 were added from Latin. So this is where it's like, if what I'm saying is correct or in the direction that I'm going, I mean, I could end up where Hoskia is. It's like, okay, well, if I have to go, okay, well, all the information is pointing in that direction. Guys like Hoskia, these other guys have looked at it, and it's like, okay, well, what can you do with that? But I'm coming to the position where I think I'm questioning all this stuff. And so in Revelation 16:5, I believe Hoskia missed that whole bigger picture. He was looking at all the details, he's compiled all the details, but he hasn't seen that bigger picture. And that's where I want to do the same, compile all the details. But, and I guess too, because he was looking at such a massive amount of work, all the manuscripts to do with Revelation, that's a huge task where I'm focusing in on these last six verses, and primarily just we're looking at, we might compare those in some lists, but once they're done, it's not like, well, actually, maybe I do have to look at the last 6 verses in a lot of manuscripts as well. But thankfully, a lot of this work's been done, and so Hoskia has gone through and done a lot of this. And so this is the thing where, Timothy Berg's saying this and that. Well, I'm actually going against, TR people, Hoskia. I mean, Hoskia, he actually once consulted a spirit medium, a clairvoyant type occultist, to find out where a manuscript came from. It's quite interesting. And so, but he's got quite a bit written here about Reuchlin's text and Erasmus's text. And so these are things that I'm going to go through and check as well. And so, but it does seem to go back to Delitzsch. But then before Delitzsch, there was the groundwork of Tregillis's earlier material, and then back to Bengal and Whetstein and these other guys. And so that's a whole other thing that I've got to look at. So I've got a lot of work to do, but I'm looking forward to it. Anyway, guys, I might leave it there. And so hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I'm going to share this around. If you did enjoy this video, like it, because then it gets up in the search engines. Share it with other people. Hopefully, I was looking the other day. Sam Shamoon contacted me the other day and said, "Hey Nick, I think you suck, but what about this and that?" And he asked me for some details about Jehovah and Yahweh, and so I sent it to him. But how's that? You start an email with someone. It's like, "I think you suck." It's because I don't think Mary was sinless, so he's against me because of that. It's like, okay. But when I look at, he's got 40,000 followers. And, so I'll tune into what he's saying. He usually spends the first 20 minutes sort of, praying and talking about God and sins of the flesh and stuff. And then he'll get into what he's talking about. And I'm not saying that some of what he's talking about isn't interesting. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting. But I sort of fast forward the other sections. But he's got 40,000 followers. If I had that many followers, I could put ads on YouTube and make quite a fair bit of money, and talk about different things, and talk about different TR products and things like that, and probably sell stuff. And so ultimately, if you want to watch where I'm going with this type of thing, watch my previous video on 20 things that I'm doing. It goes for a while, but you'll get the gist of, like, I want to do this full time. And I think that's one of the things that does come against what I'm doing, is that I'm doing this part time. And so that's where I feel like sometimes I've studied something, Saturday, Sunday, I was like, wow, I know all about that. A week goes by and it's like, where was I again? And I have to sort of re-dig a whole bunch of stuff. And it's like, just to get back to that, where I remember back in 2003, I was able to have a year and a half off. And that was so good. And that's when I started studying Greek. I started studying the issues of the versions, and just spending time reading through, like, the King James Bible in audio and visual, and just going through them. And so basically, reading from Genesis to Revelation an hour a day, just reading the Bible with the audio playing. So that way, every word that came through, I could pronounce it properly, because sometimes you're like, how do you say Nebuchadnezzar? It's like Nebuchadnezzar, it's like, that's how they say it anyway, or Scoresby, or whoever I was listening to back then. But then going through that with the Greek, there's a lot of, if you want to learn Greek and read along with the Greek, there's some really good stuff. If you just type in Textus Receptus, say Matthew 1, on YouTube, there's some really good stuff. I might just show you. YouTube.com. Okay, so let's just go through Textus Receptus, Matthew 1. This one here. Great for...
Βίβλος γενέσεως Ιησού Χριστού, Ιού Δαβίδ, Ιού Αβραάμ. Αβραάμ εγέννησε τον Ισαάκ. Ισαάκ δε εγέννησε τον Ιακώβ. Ιακώβ δε εγέννησε τον Ιούδαν και τους αδελφούς αυτού. Ιούδας δε εγέννησε τον Φαρές.
Very helpful if you want to read through the Greek. Βίβλος γενέσεως Ιησού Χριστού, Ιού Δαβίδ, Ιού Αβραάμ. Αβραάμ εγέννησε τον Ισαάκ. Ισαάκ δε εγέννησε τον Ιακώβ. Ιακώβ δε εγέννησε τον Ιούδαν και τους αδελφούς αυτού. Ιούδας δε εγέννησε τον Φαρές. Kai ton Zara Ektesthema, Phares de Jensen ton Ezrom, Ezrom de Jensen ton Aram, Aram de Jensen ton Aminadab, Aminadab. And so when you read through this, and even I would also suggest, if you're learning Greek, there's a guy called, what's his name? This guy. Alexander Arguelles. I'm probably saying that wrong, but he's just started to do a whole bunch of new videos. He is absolutely legendary if you want to learn languages, or he has the distinction too between learning languages to be spoken and also, what did he call it? It was a special word. Because that's polyglot, but then he called it polyliteracy, which I thought was an interesting word, which is wanting to know what things say in other languages, but you don't know how to say it. It's like Coptic and Ethiopic and these type of things. You're just interested because of the Bible, and so he does things that are even scriptural as well. So he has, like say in this video, he goes through.
Scriptorium is a technique where
In principio erat verba. So he's
erat apud erat verbum et verb else. The purpose of scriptorium is to make yourself.
So he's talking about writing the words out. Like, it sounds like he doesn't know what he's saying there, but he actually speaks it fluently. But he's writing it out, saying in principio erat, and so it's good to go through his stuff and to just to listen to it. If you, it puts you on the path of here it is, polyliteracy, because there's polyglottery, which is speaking, but then there are things like being literate in other languages, and so. And I guess that comes to dead languages. We don't chat to each other in dead languages, but sometimes we can read them and understand them. And so he's got lots and lots of really good information. So I'd recommend you jump on there. What else have I got to say? I think that's about it. But yeah, so this is just like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. He's just started to make, because his stuff was like, his videos, most of them were like 10 years ago, 9 years ago, and these are like gold. You go through them and they're just so good. But then he just sort of would make a video every now and then, but then he actually did a big apology and said, look, I'm sorry guys, I'm going to actually start teaching you guys on YouTube, and I think he's really enjoying it. And so he's starting to make these videos again and throwing them online. He's getting quite a few hits. And I mean, you're looking at someone, this guy, he has, let's just look at he's got 30,000 subscribers already, and he hasn't really even tried. He's just thrown up a few things, 13 years ago, and look, 185. If he actually ran ads on that, he'd do quite well. So I'm looking at all these things and going, man, these guys, but what he would do is he would be in Korea teaching Arabic to Korean students. And so he has to know Arabic, he has to know Korean, he had his website, you can probably still find it on Wayback Machine, but his former website, he's pulled it down now. He had every language that he was fluent in, and then he would have this level of 0 to 100 of where he was fluent in a language. So if he could just, have a conversation in language, it was like he was sort of like 20%, or whatever. And because he considers like being at university level as fluent. And so there was languages, it was like 20 languages he was absolutely 100% fluent in. He could teach university level. And it's like, man, that's impressive. And so this is the sort of guy where I look at like Lancelot Andrews and these guys as being like this. So Stephen Hayes has just said, funny, the silence from the critical text crowd on your work on Revelation 16:5 is deafening. On the other hand, your defense on the name of Jehovah has been picked up by quite a few Bible students. It's interesting that the Revelation 16:5 stuff. I think at first it seemed, when people were looking at it, because there were some concepts that were sort of new to Bible students. A lot of Bible students didn't realize the one who was and is and is to come, or the one who was and isn't shall be, was an expansion of Jehovah, or I am, the past, the present, the future. So sometimes even when you bring that up, people are like, whoa, hang on. And it's like it's new material. Like, it was sort of new for me. When I started studying, I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And I've just dug more and more into it, and it just expanded out into this huge thing. And I guess the thing is, if I was a critical text guy, yeah, if I was young Franz and I came up with this material, it would probably be praised, and obviously I don't, dot my I's and cross my T's. I nearly said dot my T's and cross my I's. It's like I don't do the same scholarly work that these guys do, obviously, because I'm doing this part time, and I've purposely made it so I'm just a layman, because I believe anyone can do the work that I'm doing if you just give time to it. You don't need an alphabet soup after your name, but the these guys, they're full time and they're getting paid to write books, on these issues. So obviously they're going to have time and they're going to have access to source documents and all the rest of it. But we're doing what we can do, and I'm sort of surprised that some of the critical text guys haven't turned around and said, "Hey, Nick, on that verse, I think you're correct," and especially since it's not my idea, it's Beza's. It's like, but it's just that it's King James and it's TR. You don't want to agree with the cultists. You may as well be agreeing with Jehovah's Witnesses or something. So anyway, I've written part 1 on this, so I'm not sure where I'm going to go with part 2. Because this is just a huge general overview. I'm going to share this video around with a whole bunch of people so people can know where I'm up to, what I know, what I don't know. And some people might be watching this and going, Nick, you really need to know this. And the good thing is I contacted maybe about 30 people. I was going through my chats, and I only went back like 3 or 4 years. There's so many really good people out there who know their stuff. And it's very exciting, actually. Like, even I'm like, Taylor, I recommend anyone watch Taylor DeSoto's material on YouTube. Very good TR information. Like Jeff Rill, I haven't even contacted Jeff Rill. I contacted Robert Truelove. I contacted even David Daniels. Who else was there? What's his name? Joseph Armstrong. He's staunchly like KJV from the school of Ripplinger and things like that. But it's like, he gave me some information about Revelation 65 that helped, and so him, a whole bunch of other people. And sometimes they see things from different angles, and there was like 30 people. There was Albert Hammond. Who else was there? Jonathan Sheffield. Stephen Avery. Like 30 different people. I contacted Kirk DeVitro, and I was like, man, there's so many people here. This is like a whole wealth of people. It would be great, like say on this issue, because I've sort of shown you how I do things. This is where I would start, and then I go off in different directions. And it would be so good for someone to just go, okay, Nick's got this webpage here. What does Doug Kulik say about this? And just go through and just read that, think about it, and go through and just, if there's anything that he said that's wrong or, can't be proven, or anything else that Doug has said over the years, it's like digging up all the information and just putting it there. Or probably not Doug. It might be a bit boring going through him, but probably more so the source documents. Let's just go up a bit. Like, say, Bengal. What did he say about it? What did Franz Delitzsch say? I mean, we know that he's got his book, the Handskriften or Handschriftlich, where he talks specifically about this. And so, and he's got the manuscript of Revelation, he's collated it there and all the rest of it. What did he say? What are his conclusions? Jan Kranz talks about these 2 pages, the 14th page and 15th page, that it's a scolding rebuke against Erasmus. Like in his Beyond What Is Written book, he has a footnote and he says, for a more scolding rebuke or something like that, see these 2 pages. And so I'm like, okay, but it's in German. But he does have a few little English bits here and there. So that's where it's like, okay, well, Google Translate or whatever, but it might be someone who's watching who knows German, and for them just to write this out or type it out, it's like, hey, that's no problem. Or it might have already been done. I'm sure that lots of people have wanted to know what he's saying here. So I know that Tregelles, in the middle of this document, he has a whole bunch of stuff in English. And so it might be after the... Yes, it's going to be interesting to go through this stuff here, where he's talking about, 19, 20, 21. And so, but I'm pretty sure just after this is Tregelles. Oh, yeah, that's his inscription. Notes on Codex Roiclini. Okay, so this is the English part by Tregelles. So, yeah, I've got to go through that, I guess, and a few notes on Codex Roiclini of the Apocalypse, together with the collation of its text with the common editions by S.P. Tregelles. So going through that, and one thing I really want to know is when it became like, okay, it's about 6 verses, because it was about 1 verse, according to everyone around Erasmus's time. And it's like 300 years later, it's like, oh no, it's about 6 verses. And was that just at the discovery of that manuscript? And is there enough proof that that's the manuscript that Erasmus used? Now, I know that it's got Reuchlin written on it. Apparently, it's got Reuchlin's own handwriting in it. But did he own more than one manuscript? Anyway, I'm sort of repeating myself here, so I'm going to go. God bless you guys, and have a great week. And I'll try to get on top of all the other videos I've got to do. But this is going to be part 1 of the last 6 verses of Revelation. And so thanks for watching, guys, and God bless. Where are we? Live streaming, end stream.